Joe Biden is officially ready to shut down the US border to protect the United States from illegal immigrants. I mean, he's even saying, for too long, we all know the border's been broken. It's long past time to fix it. The only issue is Texas and the United States government cannot agree on whether or not this is a good idea. Texas has already declared a state of emergency and has said they are being invaded, thus invoking the National Guard and their state security forces to protect the state. And the US government is trying to pass a bill on a Ukrainian aid package that also has tied into border security. But the main foundation of all of this is that Joe Biden has all of a sudden flipped the script and has said, I will shut down the border. Now, let us dig into all the facts and implications because there is a ton going on here, and this is a massive deal for the United States to all of a sudden shut down the border. But first off, you already know, I don't do sponsors, so please at least like the video. It's free, comment, or turn on your notifications. I'm tired of all of you missing my videos, and it helps you out a lot, and it also helps me out a lot, so please do that. Okay, so what you need to understand, at the time of making this video, nothing has really changed in the status of Texas. They have still invoked their constitutional right to protect themselves because Texas has deemed that the federal government is not doing enough to protect Texas. And as it stands in the location of Shelby Park, which is located in Eagle Pass, Texas, the biggest crossing point for illegal immigrants, the National Guard has isolated and created their own little stronghold where they are essentially stopping or detaining migrants and sending them back out of the country. And this is something the National Guard has not been able to do. I mean, essentially, Homeland Security and other federal entities were doing all of that, and the National Guard was just standing around with their hands in their pockets. So that is still happening, and there's probably going to be some legal battles between the state of Texas and the federal government, and that's been happening for the last several years now. But really, the big news is this. All of a sudden, Joe Biden is acknowledging that there is a border crisis. And because of this, Joe Biden is essentially pleading with the federal government to figure out a bill to give money to Ukraine, but to also figure out the border security thing. Now, Texas released a very staggering statistic that back in December of 2023, over 300,000 undocumented illegal immigrants came into the country through Texas. Now, the reason why that number is extremely relevant, apparently the bill that is being talked about in Senate, there is a cap on how many migrants can come into the country. The cap is around 5,000 migrants a day are allowed to be processed into the country. This doesn't mean a migrant will make it into the country automatically, but it allows for the migrant to have the opportunity to either plead his case or to, at the very least, seek asylum into the country. Now look, I am terrible at math, but I calculated that every single day for the month of December, if we had over 300,000 illegal migrants coming into the country, this means 10,000 migrants a day were coming into the country. And this number is only increasing and increasing because look, these migrants are not dumb. They know that eventually their time is up and it's going to get a lot harder to come into the country. And because of this, there's more and more migrants a day showing up to the border and trying to get into the state of Texas or other portals of entry into the United States. But again, if the cap is only 5,000 migrants can come into the country a day, and then all of a sudden Biden can invoke his right to shut down the border, there is going to be millions upon millions of migrants, statistically speaking and mathematically speaking, just sitting on the country's border. And this is a huge problem for not only like Republicans, but really everyone. I don't think anyone finds it appropriate to have millions of migrants just sitting on the border, but really the main cause for concern is why all of a sudden is Biden finding this an issue, and why is Biden not willing just to work with the state of Texas, who is on the front lines of all of this? And I really do have to point this out, regardless of what side you're on, whether or not you support Ukraine, because look, the United States, statistically speaking, is supporting Ukraine less and less when you look at polls. Many people are asking, what does Ukraine have to do with the Texas border or the border in general? So you can see all of this is almost turning into a circus. Is the government looking out for the best interest of the people, or is the government trying not to look bad in front of their friends? For those of you who don't remember, many people point to Joe Joe Biden to include Democrats for all of these issues or the continuation of an influx of migrants coming into the country. When Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in the votes to become the US president, Joe Biden almost immediately took away Donald Trump's laws that were happening on the border, where things were extremely strict. Once Joe Biden came in, he seems to be okay for migrants just to come on into the country. And I know that's like an oversimplification of what Joe Biden did, but again, when you look at the numbers and charts of how many migrants started coming into the country, it is quite staggering. Again, according to Texas, over the last 3 years, we're talking about 6 million undocumented illegal immigrants coming into the country. Now, there is some good in this bill. I don't like to be the person who just totally craps on everyone. There's a couple good things, actually. In this bill, essentially, the United States wants to create better living conditions for migrants coming into the country. And something else that I think is rather crucial is that the United States wants to create the asylum process to be a lot easier. Essentially, the United States wants to create a way for anyone to plead their case for seeking asylum in the United States. And rather than waiting like 3 years for your answer, the number will be 6 months to where you will get your answer if you can seek asylum in the United States. We need to be very careful in grouping all illegal immigrants into one category because without a doubt, there are migrants trying to come into this country who come from the worst of worst environments who could really bring in something great to this country. So again, we have to be careful when we group everyone together, and it looks like this bill is trying to at least isolate the asylum seekers who do have a valid reason to come into the country. Maybe they escaped a war-torn Sudan and risked it all to get to this country. Look, that's how this country was built, on risks and trying to get in and make a better life. That is why the United States is great. But look, the main issue is this. The federal government, Joe Biden's administration, cannot agree with how Texas is dealing with the border issues. I mean, guys, you have to understand, Texas has really been on the forefront of like everything going on in the border and security for the country. Texas has deemed the cartel a terror organization. The federal government has been wanting to do this for a while, but somehow Texas has managed to actually do it. Texas has found a legal way to invoke their National Guard rights to finally protect their own state and use their local militiamen. And the federal government, Homeland Security, and Border Patrol cannot find a way to coexist with the National Guard, essentially almost treating the Texas National Guard as second-class citizens. And one of the weirdest and lamest excuses and why Joe Biden all of a sudden wanting to fix the border, again, is a very odd thing. Joe Biden, his administration, has been wanting to remove razor wire that the National Guard has in place on the border. And the main reason for this is because, according to Homeland Security, the razor wire is getting in their way from doing their job. But as a former combat engineer or anyone who owns an okay set of gloves, you can actually pick up the razor wire and move it out of the way. And not only that, razor wire is a defensive measure, and it's meant to keep people away. For migrants just to walk into the razor wire, that is not the fault of the National Guard, nor is it what the Supreme Court saw that was happening on the border. The Supreme Court actually did go in favor of Homeland Security, that yes, it is getting in the way, but nonetheless, this to me is an extremely petty thing when the National Guard is trying to work with Homeland Security. So guys, what we're truly seeing is like the federal government versus the states. Who has more power and who is able to win in a court? To be honest with you, on the state level, it looks like Texas has essentially won almost every single court hearing whenever the federal government has tried to undermine Texas protecting their own state. And I think most people can agree, or at least rather sympathetic, that Texas does have a massive issue. Again, not all migrants are bad, but the problem is when you live in the state of Texas, especially on these border regions, and you have all of these people, you don't know who they are, walking all over their lands, it's not that the people of Texas don't want migrants coming into their country, but again, we have to put ourselves in those people's shoes. When you have millions of people coming on your state lands and you don't know who they are, that's a problem. Because look, without a doubt, you have a ton of bad apples, but you also have a lot of good apples, and I think Texas is at least trying to figure out something, or at least give more rights to their own state security guards, the National Guard and other like state troopers and stuff, to at least help and process these migrants. I think the really big misconception is that Texas is just luring in these migrants and then immediately kicking them out. That is not the case. Texas just wants the opportunity to have their own way to validate who comes into the country and who has to leave the country. Again, it would be extremely hypocritical. Again, this would be extremely hypocritical for Texas to kick out asylum seekers when Texas knows that a lot of migrants coming into the country, they are seeking asylum. Sorry, I had to take off my jacket. I was getting worked up. So at this point, nothing is set in stone. What is set in stone is that Joe Biden did put out a very lengthy statement, essentially saying, look, government, work together. I want to invoke my right to shut down the borders, but there needs to be a certain cap. We need to let the asylum seekers come into the country. Oh, but also Ukraine. I think everyone is highly confused. Even me trying to make this video, it took me a while of research to figure things out, because Republicans are already saying, no, we're not going to deal with this, especially if Ukraine has anything to do with this. Even some Democrats are saying, Biden, why all of a sudden are you like changing your tune? You almost sort of look like Donald Trump. And I could clickbait all of you and put Donald Trump quotes all over the screen, but I'm not going to do that because I want to be fair and honest with you. His points and opinions are really irrelevant at the moment because he has no power. But without a doubt, if Donald Trump does win his presidency, he's probably going to make the border as strict or even more strict than he already has before. But look, as it stands, this is essentially breaking news that Joe Biden is willing and able to shut down the border as long as Congress figures out a bill and as long as the government figures out a way to deliver an aid package to Ukraine. Look, most likely this will end up happening because, again, when you look at the charts and the statistics, things are getting worse and worse and worse. The fact that we had over 300,000 migrants or illegal immigrants come into the country undocumented, that is a problem, and that is why Texas is saying we are literally being invaded. If the government wants to do whatever they want to do, Texas is going to protect Texas, so stay out of our business.